Today, we need to talk about a conflict that's creating an absolutely unimaginable catastrophe. But for some reason, it's often called the Forgotten War. We're going to break down the devastating civil war happening right now in Sudan.
I want you to just take a second and read that. That's not a line from some horror movie. It's a direct quote from Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab. They were analyzing satellite photos from a city called al-Bashir. It's just a brutal, horrifying glimpse into what's happening on the ground, a systematic ethnic cleansing.
And this is no exaggeration. The United Nations itself has officially labeled the situation in Sudan as the world's single largest humanitarian crisis. Right now, millions and millions of lives are just hanging in the balance, and the scale of the suffering is almost impossible to comprehend.
So, first things first, let's tackle the biggest questions here. What is actually driving this brutal conflict? And maybe just as important, why does it feel like the rest of the world has just looked away?
The immediate cause of this war isn't some ancient history or a really complex ideology. When you strip it all down, at its very heart, it is a raw, violent, and brutal power struggle between two men. Two generals who, believe it or not, once worked together to seize control of the country. So that brings us to Section 2, a general's war. This whole thing is a fight for absolute power, for influence, and, of course, for control over Sudan's incredible natural wealth.
Okay, so let's meet the players. On one side, you have General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. He commands the official Sudanese Armed Forces, or the SAF. And on the other side, we've got General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who most people just call Hemedti. He leads this incredibly powerful paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. And here's the wild part. These two guys were once allies. They worked together to overthrow a dictator. But that partnership just completely shattered into this violent rivalry for total control. So what made it all blow up? Well, it came down to a few key issues. First, they couldn't agree on how to merge Dagalo's massive 100,000-strong RSF into the regular army. Then, of course, the million-dollar question. Who would be the top dog, the ultimate commander of that new integrated force? And crucially, this is about money, big money, specifically control over Sudan's incredibly lucrative gold mines, which both sides are using to bankroll their war machines. But really, it all boils down to one thing: a brutal, raw fight for power.
But, a conflict this vicious doesn't just appear out of thin air. To really get what's happening today, you have to look back. You have to look at the roots of this violence, and they're tangled up in a 30-year dictatorship and a horrifying history of ethnic cleansing, especially in a region called Darfur.
Now, this is a word you absolutely have to understand to get the full picture. Janjaweed. It literally translates to a horse-riding devil. That was the name given to this brutal Arab militia that the former dictator Omar al-Bashir unleashed on non-Arab tribes in Darfur back in the 2000s. Their campaign of mass murder and rape was so horrific it was labeled a genocide. And this group, this is the direct predecessor of today's RSF. This timeline really just connects all the dots. It starts with al-Bashir's 30-year rule. Then, in 2003, he unleashes the Janjaweed in Darfur. Fast forward a decade, and that very same militia gets a new name, the RSF, with Dagalo now in charge. Then, in 2019, Burhan and Dagalo actually team up to kick out their old boss. But just 2 years later, they turn on the civilian government. And by April 2023, their personal rivalry explodes into the all-out war we see today.
And the cost, the human cost of this power struggle is it's staggering. Let's really look at the price being paid by the people of Sudan and how outside countries are actually fueling this fire.
The numbers are they're hard to wrap your head around. Current estimates say that more than 150,000 people have been killed so far. An unbelievable 10 million people, that's more than the entire population of a country like Sweden, have been forced to flee their homes. It's a massive, massive displacement crisis.
And the war has triggered a catastrophic hunger crisis. Just in the Darfur and Kordofan regions alone, 375,000 people are projected to be facing actual starvation. The World Food Program is warning that Sudan is right on the brink of the biggest hunger crisis in recent memory.
Think about this for a second. A staggering 30 million people, that is 60% of the entire population, are in desperate need of humanitarian help. The very fabric of the country is being ripped to shreds.
So this all leads to a really critical question. If the crisis is this bad, why isn't more being done? Well, a huge part of the answer is that this has become a proxy war, with foreign powers backing different sides for their own strategic gains. And this is where it gets incredibly complicated. You've got the UAE and Russia's Wagner Group accused of arming Dagalo's RSF, a lot of times in exchange for that gold we talked about. Then, on the other side, you have Iran and Egypt allegedly supplying drones and other support to Burhan's army. All this international meddling just makes a peaceful solution nearly impossible, because each side is constantly being rearmed by its foreign backers. So, what happens now? Where do we go from here? Well, what we're looking at is a landscape of failed peace talks, a diplomatic process that's completely stalled out, and a world that, for the most part, seems to be ignoring one of its absolute worst crises. Now, it's not like there isn't a plan on the table. There is. It was proposed by a coalition that includes the U.S. and key regional powers. It calls for a humanitarian pause, then a permanent ceasefire, and a transition back to civilian rule. But here's the deadlock, the whole reason it's stuck. The RSF says they've accepted it, but Burhan's army has not. So nothing happens. And you can literally see the global failure to respond in the money, or I should say the lack of money. The UN says it needs over $4 billion to even begin to address this crisis. So far, it's received less than half of that. The aid just is not there to meet this overwhelming, crushing need. When you really boil it all down, the tragedy of Sudan is the story of an entire nation held hostage by the greed of a few powerful men, a dictator and the two generals who came after him. Their personal ambitions have absolutely destroyed their country. The situation is horrific, it's bleak, but analysts agree it's not hopeless. This violence can be stopped, but only if the world, all of us, finally decide to pay attention.